I want to tell you about a conversation I had with someone close to me. A man I've known for years, someone who by every external measure had what most people would call a good life, solid career, good looking, and actually emotionally intelligent, more than he ever let on. One afternoon he said something I couldn't shake for weeks. He said, "Chan, I'm not angry, I'm just done trying to win a game where the rules keep changing." He wasn't talking about a specific woman. He was talking about the whole thing, the agreement, the unspoken deal that society handed men and said, "Here, sign here, don't read the fine print." And the more I sat with that, the more I realized he wasn't alone, not even close. Here's what's actually happening underneath all of it. There's a silent agreement most men absorbed growing up. Nobody handed them a document. Nobody sat them down and explained the terms, but it was there, communicated through every father they watched, every movie they saw, every cultural message that told them what a man is supposed to do: work hard, pursue, provide, be consistent, don't complain, show up, and in return, you'll be valued, you'll be chosen, you'll have a place in someone's life that actually feels like home. That was the deal, and for a long time, millions of men signed it without question. They're not signing it anymore. Stats from 2026 confirm what a lot of people have been noticing quietly for years. More and more men are walking away from marriage, long-term commitment, even sustained participation in the structures built around partnership. And the conversation happening in most public spaces, it completely misses why. This is the part most people get wrong. The narrative we keep hearing is that men are afraid of commitment, that they're emotionally immature, that they just want to be alone with their PlayStation and their protein powder, and I want to push back on that. Hard. Because I've spent years watching this pattern up close, and I can tell you, the men walking away aren't broken. They're not afraid. They're doing math, and the math stopped working. Let me show you what I mean. The first reason, the terms changed, and nobody told them. US Census Bureau figures show married couple households dropped from 71% in 1970 to 47% today. Sociologist Brad Wilcox's 2024 book Get Married documents a 65% decline in the marriage rate over the past half-century. Here's what strikes me about those numbers, though. They don't tell you why. They just show the exit. And when you actually look at the why, something unexpected comes up. Young men's median earnings in 2025 are at a roughly 50-year high, and yet marriage rates kept falling anyway, so the economic explanation just doesn't fit the data. If men can afford partnership and they're still not pursuing it, something else is going on, something cultural, something psychological, something nobody wants to name directly. The deal changed on them. The original agreement included a specific return: respect, appreciation, a defined role, a sense that your contribution actually mattered. And quietly, over the past 2 decades, a lot of those returns got pulled from the offer. The cost stayed exactly the same. The second reason, they watched what happened to the men before them. You know that thing where you watch someone ahead of you walk straight into a glass door, full speed, face first, and then you slow down before you hit the same spot? That's basically what a generation of younger men is doing right now. They were told that if you work hard, stay loyal, provide for your family, you'll be respected and loved. That contract is broken. And the men coming up behind the ones who got hurt have noticed. Today, women initiate around 70% of divorces. Men who do everything right can still lose their homes, lose access to their kids, and get hit with child support and alimony. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying this to assign blame, that's not the point. But from a purely psychological standpoint, from a risk assessment standpoint, men are looking at those outcomes and recalibrating, quietly, without drama, without a manifesto. They're just not going all in on a bet with catastrophic downside. And the thing is, the men making that calculation aren't cold or selfish. A lot of them genuinely want love. The Institute for Family Studies 2026 State of Our Unions report found that most young adults still endorse relatively traditional purposes for dating and don't express an overt fear of commitment. They want it. They're just afraid of what it costs. The third reason, They felt optional, and eventually they believed it. This is the one that hits different when I try to explain it, because it's subtle. It doesn't show up in one conversation. It builds over time, like water erosion. You don't notice the damage until the ground gives way. Long before men reach a breaking point, many are already living lives stripped of close connection. Recent UK research from the Belonging Forum found that 1 in 10 men report having no close friends at all. So a lot of the men walking away from the traditional agreement aren't walking towards something better socially. They're walking into a kind of isolated freedom. And the fact that they're still choosing that over partnership, that tells you something important about how unwanted they felt inside the relationships they tried to build. Equimundo's 2025 State of American Men report shows economic anxiety is hitting men's sense of purpose hard. But economic anxiety isn't the whole story. The deeper wound is feeling supplementary, optional, decorative at best. When a man consistently shows up and his presence feels like a nice to have rather than something genuinely valued, something shifts. He stops trying to convince anyone of his worth, and eventually he stops showing up altogether. The fourth reason, reciprocity collapsed and nobody acknowledged it. Here's something I think about a lot. Both sides of this conversation have a legitimate grievance. Women carry enormous invisible labour. That's real and documented. Men feel like their contributions go unrecognised and their needs go unanswered. That's also real. And somehow we've built a cultural moment where only one side of that imbalance gets to be named out loud. There's research on what happens when someone consistently prioritises another person's needs, desires, and emotions at the expense of their own. You lose self-esteem. You start feeling like your worth is only tied to your partner's approval. Over time, you lose touch with your own identity. That research is talking about relationships generally, but it describes exactly what happens to men who spend years giving inside a dynamic where giving only flows one direction. They lose themselves, then they lose interest, then they leave. The men I've talked to about this don't describe bitterness. They describe exhaustion. That specific kind of tired that comes from trying hard, caring deeply, and feeling like none of it actually landed. The fifth reason, masculinity got deconstructed, but nothing was built in its place. I want to be honest here. The critique of toxic masculinity was necessary. The parts of traditional male identity that cause genuine harm, the emotional suppression, the domination, the inability to ask for help, those needed to be challenged. I'm not defending any of that. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Research going back to the 1990s has repeatedly found that rigidly conforming to traditional masculine norms is actually bad for men's mental health. Depression, isolation, it's documented. So we had a problem. We named the problem. But then instead of replacing the broken framework with something healthier, a lot of the cultural conversation just kept dismantling. And you can't keep tearing things down without building something in their place. What you get when you do that is exactly what's happening now. Men drawn to hardline online masculinity communities often report feeling voiceless, invisible, disrespected. That's the vacuum getting filled. Not because those spaces are good, they often aren't. But when legitimate spaces for male identity get removed without replacement, men find the illegitimate ones instead. The men quietly walking away from the agreement aren't going there, but they're also not finding a compelling alternative. They're finding a clean, quiet, single life. And for a lot of them, that wins by default. The sixth reason, the pursuit itself became humiliating. For a lot of men, dating has become a game they feel set up to lose. I want to sit with that for a second. Because I don't think most people understand how demoralizing the modern pursuit dynamic has become. Not for the men who game it, not. For the ones running from commitment, but for the emotionally available ones. The ones who actually wanted something real. On dating apps, Men have around a 5% match rate versus 44% for women. I'm not saying that to start a debate. I'm saying it because repeated emotional experience shapes behaviour. When a man invests his time, his vulnerability, his genuine effort, and gets met with consistent rejection, or indifference, or being treated like an audition rather than a person, eventually the investment stops feeling worth it. Nobody prepares you for that. Nobody tells a man who did everything right, who showed up emotionally, who communicated, who tried to be present, that the outcome might still be nothing, that he might walk away from years of effort feeling worse than when he started. When that happens enough times, the agreement starts looking like a trap. Not because the man is broken, because the feedback loop is broken. The 7th reason. Their peace became more valuable than the promise. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because honestly, a lot of men who've walked away from the traditional agreement are fine, actually fine, not performing contentment, genuinely building something that works for them. The crisis is real. But so is something else that doesn't get named enough. The man who steps out of the agreement and stops performing what society expected of him. Sometimes he finds himself, his actual preferences, his actual needs, what he actually values, rather than what he was told to value. And once a man finds that version of himself, the one that doesn't need external validation to feel whole, he becomes very hard to reach with the old offer, because the old offer assumed he was hungry, and he fed himself. So what does any of this mean? If you're a woman trying to understand why the men in your life are pulling back, the answer isn't that they don't want connection. Research shows most young men still endorse traditional purposes for dating and don't fear commitment. But a lot of them lack the skills for navigating it, and the resilience to handle the emotional hits it brings. The men walking away aren't your enemy. They're exhausted from a deal that stopped making sense. And the way to reach them isn't to demand they sign the old contract, it's to build something new, where respect moves in both directions, where presence gets valued before it's taken for granted, where both people actually feel chosen. And if you're a man who recognizes himself in this, hear me on this one. Opting out permanently doesn't fill the hole. It just makes it quieter. The goal isn't to stop wanting connection. It's to stop accepting connection that costs you everything and gives you nothing back. The old agreement is broken. That part's true. But a broken agreement doesn't mean no agreement is possible. It means the next one has to be built better, written differently, with terms that actually make sense for the people signing it. Both sides deserve that. Both sides are capable of it. The only question is whether both sides are willing to be honest enough to actually build it. That's the real work that's waiting.